Oh, how I want to sit here and sing into your night.
Lean deep inside the elbows of this river, where the sky bends into sleep.
Lean deep inside the elbows of this river where blood is born.
Sing a litany into this open book of your story, my story.
Sing a litany into this open book of your story. My story.
This river shrugs its belly, births kindness for all things yet to be born.
This river shrugs its belly, births kindness for all things yet to be born.
Oh, how I want to sit here and feast from your wet palms.
Oh, how I want to sit here and feast from your wet palms.
This river, wounded heart, holding the locked secrets of ancestral crones, kneeling, feeding the doorways of all your and my drowned seasons.
This river, this river, wounded heart, holding the locked secrets of ancestral crows, kneeling, feeding the doorway of all your my dry seasons.
Oh, how I want to be born inside this river as a lone wild burst of yellow, becoming more and more an eclipse of wind, becoming more and more an eclipse of freedom.
Becoming more and more an eclipse of wind. Becoming more and more an eclipse of freedom. We are all this flow.
We are all this flow. We are all this river.
We are all.
Welcome, everyone. We are glad that you're able to join us this evening. My name is Gabby Pinto, and I'll be the technical support for the session. Before we begin, let me cover the technical aspects of the session. As an attendee, you will be muted and you will not have video. You were notified when you joined today's session that it will be recorded. By continuing in our session, you are consenting to be recorded. You can interact during the session by sending in questions using the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the screen for those who have joined via a computer, or at the top of the screen for those who have joined via a mobile device. Closed captioning is also available. You can turn on closed captioning by selecting CC on your screen next to the Q&A function. That covers all of the technical aspects of our session, so I'll hand it over to Leoneda Inge and Frank Stasio from WUNC to get the evening started.
Well, hi there. Hi there, I'm Leoneda Inge, the Race and Southern Culture reporter at WUNC. And it's the NPR member station in our region in North Carolina. And I just want to thank you for being here today. I'm very excited about this event. Frank?
I'm very excited about all of this. It's great. And of course, I'm Frank Stasio, host of the State of Things on WUNC. And we are pleased to be celebrating Juneteenth this evening as well. As you may know, it is the oldest celebrated ceremony and celebration of Juneteenth and the end of slavery in the United States. And we're very happy to be part of that, to talk about some of the people who have played an important part in an ongoing liberation movement, and also to listen to some poetry and to see some beautiful, beautiful slides and pictures, and listen to some incredible poetry and watch some videos as well. And of course, to take your questions throughout this entire process. We're going to talk with some great people, and I hope you take the opportunity to engage them. Right here at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button. Press the button, type the question, and we'll be happy to try to answer them the best we can. We're going to feature a video and some poetry from Jaki Shelton Green. And just a warning, there is some profanity in one of the elements of this. So there we are, forewarned. And we're very happy to be doing all this tonight. Leoneda?
Oh, yes, we are. We're also excited to be partnering with Scalawag for tonight's event. It's a journalism and storytelling organization that discusses justice and liberation and stands in solidarity with marginalized people and communities in the South. And we're also very glad to have two people from Scalawag's newsroom with us. And one of them is Danielle. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Purifoy. I am the Race and Place editor for Scalawag, which, as Leoneda has mentioned, is a nonprofit media organization based here in North Carolina. It's headquartered in Durham. And what we do is we illuminate dissent and tell stories about marginalized communities across the South. And we unsettle a lot of dominant narratives that are told by national media outlets about our region, and stories that often get buried in the regular news cycle. So and in addition to that role, I am also an academic. I am an incoming assistant professor of geography at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And we're really excited to be here with you today.
And thanks for your environmental justice work, Danielle.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So now our Alysia, will you please introduce yourself?
I'm Alysia Harris. I'm Danielle's colleague at Scalawag. I am the arts and soul editor at Scalawag. So I deal with like the beautiful photography and the poetry. And yeah, just the soul and culture of our region. And I'm also a poet by trade and a linguist. So language is like what I do in life. It's my heart. And I just want to say just a few remarks about like Scalawag in this current moment. Like, you know, I think the recent stories about justice and liberation that have reached a mainstream appeal, well, that's not really new to Scalawag, because as a media organization, we've always centered stories of liberation and movement, because that's a founding principle of our work. Because we know justice is not a trend, it's an organized vision. And in the South, that vision is anchored in a rich and complex history. So tonight, we're going to talk about both some of that history, but also some of those present realities. And those realities are incredibly hard. We're going to be talking about racism. We're going to be talking about white supremacy. We're going to be talking about police brutality. And these are really deep issues, but we also want to remind people that what we're here to celebrate, and we're here to celebrate Juneteenth. And Juneteenth is about reveling in freedom. It's about celebrating Black liberation and remembering the joy that comes alongside working towards a fuller vision of racial justice. And so I just want to acknowledge right now that many of us might be dealing with a lot of emotion, a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of trauma right now. And so I just want to make sure that we just give ourselves the space to really create a space where we can have moments of joy, where we can have moments of a collective sigh of relief. So I just want all of us to breathe in deeply just for a minute. And again, once more, because like we got to clear the stuff out. And I hope that like we can all participate in this together. So right now, everybody in the audience, everybody that's listening in, I want you guys to use your Q&A function. And I want you guys to tap in and let us know what's been bringing you joy in the recent weeks. It could be something big. It could be something minute, something that feels insignificant, but we know that we survive trauma because we also have experiences of joy. So use your Q&A function right now at the bottom of your screen and leave a comment and tell us about your joy, and we'll share some of those responses tonight. And I'll go first. An experience of joy that I had this week was this morning. I sat on my roof. The sky, it was right before dawn, and the sky was a wonderful periwinkle. And the light was just reflecting off of the dome, the Georgia State Dome. And it was just, and I drank my tea, and it was just a moment of like complete peace and quiet. And that was something that brought me joy. Frank, what was something that brought you joy?
Well, nothing, but I will. Nothing. But I will say this moment I expected, first of all, I didn't expect to live this long because I'm actually witnessing the end of an empire. And I thought if I were ever to live this long, I would be jumping for joy just at the pure thought of that. Unfortunately, it comes commingled with the idea that there is so much more suffering ahead, and it is so much suffering that brought us to this point that I'm going to have to take a few minutes before I can answer that question. I will say this, though, because that hasn't come through yet, and I suspect it might. And then again, it might not. But I will say this, what I kept remembering this whole time, because I've been one way or another involved in some form of struggle against this empire since I was in high school, which is 750 years ago. And a lot of things have changed, and a lot of things have actually gotten better, right? Things have gotten better, although in many ways it's like moving the bubble around inside the water balloon. But there have been improvements. And you can't dismiss those, and you can't dismiss the importance of all of those movements and moments of progress that led up to this moment that allow us to be in a place where we are now. And I can say that along the way, it just never looked that way. And I'm reminded of the Zen story about the student who goes to the master after 30 years in the monastery and says, "Master, I've learned all the sutras, I've prayed, I've fasted, I'm celibate. You know, when can I bring on my enlightenment?" And the master says, "Well, you can no more bring on your enlightenment than you can make the sun rise in the morning." And the student is crestfallen. He says, "Master, I studied all the sutras. I've prayed, I've fasted, I'm celibate. If I can't bring on my enlightenment, why did I do all this?" And the master said, "So that when the sun does rise, you're awake to see it." And if that qualifies as a moment of joy, then that's my answer.
Danielle, what about you?
Yeah, it's been, I feel like my joys come in fits and snatches. I jumped on the baking bandwagon, did not know how big that bandwagon was going to be. So I have made a lot of bread and given a lot of loaves of bread to friends, and just, and taking a lot of Instagram pictures of loaves of bread. And it's been, therapeutic to kind of learn something new in that way, and to actually take time with something that takes a lot of time to do. Working, I just moved and started to a new house and started a little garden, and my tomatoes are kind of coming in now. And I think I've taken a lot of joy, even though it's been a lot of work, in having some really important conversations with comrades of mine and community members in Durham about what it means to abolish the police, right? What it means to defund the police. Durham has been in actually a multi-year fight around defunding the police through the Durham Beyond Policing Coalition and numerous other groups that have been around for much longer. After George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, we, took it to the city council, just like countless other organizers around cities in the country, and really are trying to push to think through, well, not only what does it mean to defund the police, but what comes afterwards? What are the new worlds that we're creating? And so that's an exciting and also kind of terrifying prospect, but it's really joyous all the same to be in a space where we feel like those conversations can happen.
Wow, and that's absolutely correct. And, when I think of Juneteenth, first of all, I just think no one, I'm not saying you have the right to do whatever you want to do, but I just say no one has the right not to be joyful at this time, because Juneteenth is about such a downtrodden people at the worst point of our lives. When you think of the enslaved people where we were born from, and they still found joy. What could have been worse than what our people have gone through to even be here today and to sit here, educated and pretty and talk about it, and so that's one thing I found joy in, is just looking at all those young people of all races chant, rally, protest. There were a couple of fires there and here and there, but I found much joy in watching. It reminded me of myself at that age. And so you have to almost have that, to have what's to come and what will, be, what will birth from that. I guess I've also found a lot of joy, I'm at home in Florida. So, to be at home with, 3 generations of Inges and Rolands, coming in and out of the house, usually with face masks on, to take care of my mom during this time is quite joyful, just to be with the people that I love. And also I in talking about some of the things that have been happening, really historical, I found much joy in just the last few days. I visited a town nearby in Quincy, Florida. Has one of the largest Black populations, percentage-wise, of any area, that county, in Florida. And, they actually voted for the first time, and it was unanimous, the county commission, to remove a Confederate statue. And they removed it within minutes of that vote. And they haven't been able to do that ever. So I can't even describe their joy, which brings me joy, that they were able to accomplish something that they never undoubtedly thought they could do before. Maybe didn't even feel they had the right to do, but they found that in these times. So I'm very happy about Juneteenth right now. I'm ready to celebrate. Oh my goodness, it's time to celebrate. And so Danielle, also, in this time, when you watched everything that's been going on, the uprisings, for racial justice, do you feel like anything is different this time around? I know I'm a bit older than you. I remember running the streets end apartheid, you know what I'm saying, with Randall Robinson back in the day. But what have you noticed different this time? I guess that's bringing people not only joy, but also making them feel they actually have the right to do what they're doing, and they're not standing down, actually?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it's really complicated. So on the one hand, I have a serious skepticism about a kind of overwhelming victory, right? Like in this sense of people pushing to defund the police. There are multiple different definitions of what that means, and we can talk about that. But I think that what is different is that there have been, in real rapid succession, right, a number of different moments, abolitionist type moments that have happened over the course of a relatively short period of time. So if I think back to just last year, right, we were in the midst in North Carolina of the toppling of Silent Sam on UNC's campus. And that was in the midst of a number of topplings of Confederate statues or monuments to white supremacy across the country. And so that moment was happening, in just a year ago, right? Or just even a couple of years ago, right? We had, precipitated in part, right, by Charlottesville, right, in 2017. So we had a number of moments of pushback and movement, and the work of the Black Lives Matter, the larger movement for Black Lives, organizations like Black Youth Project 100, Southerners on New Ground, right, if we're focusing in on the South, have really been critical at having this sort of long game for the last 5 to 6 years of pushing abolitionist reforms, pushing to elect officials that would be in a position to make these kinds of decisions and those sorts of things. So I think the sort of groundswell that we're seeing around abolitionist type change at this moment is a direct product of those previous formations and movements. But it sort of remains to be seen how far people will be willing to go. So I think it's important to keep the pressure on. But I'd love to ask you, I mean, you've been, traveling around North Carolina and been in this work for much longer than I have. I'm really curious about how you feel like it's changed from even previous formations of movements that, some of us may not have even been part of or aware of.
Well, I've actually seen some beautiful pictures since I've come to my family home in Tallahassee, Florida, of students protesting at Florida A&M University. People have been putting them on Facebook, and to see those pictures from the 60s and 70s, like when the bus boycott. See some beautiful pictures right now, actually, from Jade Wilson of Scalawag. Are these her pictures, Danielle?
Yes, these are Jade's pictures that they did a photo essay for us from the Raleigh protests a couple weeks ago.
And so when I look at these pictures, for example, and I look at the pictures from the 60s and the 70s of Florida A&M University students, of course, they're dressed a lot different, they seem to be so much more orderly, but, the message I feel was just as loud and proud, but it just seemed to be a little bit, proud figuratively, but just, I don't know, they're the same but different. It was a different time, when I think of Tallahassee, for example, when the bus boycott, after the Alabama bus boycotts, the next place where the bus boycotts began was in Tallahassee, actually. It was a big Black university here, and they knew they had power for change, and they did that. Another thing, what I didn't see when I look at some of those pictures, I actually did not see so many police officers, show of force like I have in, the protests going on now. Sometimes it almost seems like, come on now, let's not pick a fight, just let people be, sometimes things really jump off, when someone feels they're being picked on. And so that's what I think is pretty different. Like when we used to march to the Capitol all the time, for all sorts of different reasons. I remember when Bullock was about to become a Supreme Court justice. I remember marching to the, just different things. But it seems like in a way, maybe we were asking more permission to do what we did. They're not, a lot of the young people today aren't asking permission, and I kind of secretly applaud them for that, So I guess that's one of the differences that I see. Wow.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've seen a lot at Scalawag is really like the role of protest art, right? And resistance art in multiple ways. And I know Alysia has been really working on, curating a lot of that for us so that we can present, what folks on the ground in the South are doing in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, the arts provide, a way of galvanizing your imagination, and I think at this moment, we're at the sort of the nexus of what's possible becoming what's necessary. And I think art does that, right? We take something that's in the mind sort of, and we're bringing it into reality. And I think this is like, art is that practice. And I think artists are definitely a part of social change. It's why when people talk about revolution, they're always talking about the poets, right? Because, well, one, you have to revolutionize a society, but you can't do that until you revolutionize language and the ways that you use language. And I think that's a really interesting part about being a journalist or working in media at this juncture, is seeing actually the ways that media is wrestling with and trying to figure out what is the correct language to use in a moment where we're talking about liberation. And Scalawag has been really intentional about that. We may not be like the biggest organization, but we push a lot of people towards like challenging those questions about what does it mean to be anti-racist in your media, right? In what you put out, in the stories that you promote, in the narratives that you tell or imply in your stories. And I think, just art and poetry and photography is a way of triggering the imagination to say what I see is not all that there is and not all that there should be.
That's right. And Frank, we have a wonderful artist and a poet that we'll highlight soon. Yes.
Jaki Shelton Green,
yes.
Poet Laureate of North Carolina, who will be on the show tomorrow, I'm happy to say, along with Nina Freelon, and Jade is going to be there as well with some talking about photographs and art and the way in which art does transform any movement, because one of the things that you have to do in any movement is subvert language. Language is a tool of the oppressor. And once you adopt it and internalize it and begin to spit it back and replicate the same phrases over and over again, they lose their inherent meaning and their coded meaning to the individuals, and they reinforce this superstructure of race, in our case, racism and white supremacy. And so what art and what poetry do is pull the rug out from underneath all of that and upend you and hopefully leave you groundless. And in your groundlessness, you begin to feel a sense of reality, and you've broken through the glass. And Jaki Shelton Green has done that just systematically. And this last work, I tell you, this album is utterly amazing. And the work in it and the way in which she brings nature into conversation, which of course, I mean, that's the thing that modernism pushed out, right? What we did was thingify the natural world, as Martin Luther King said. We thingify everything. That's what capitalism does. And that the effect of that, of course, is to make you the individual, the arbiter of all truth. By bringing nature back into the conversation, right, and having painful conversations with natural elements, we realize our interconnectedness. and she subverts that language of division, separation, and individuality. It's beautiful stuff. And so the album is called The River Speaks of Thirst. And we are going to talk about it. Right now we're going to watch a video from one of the album's tracks. This one is called Oh My Brother.
Oh, my brother. For Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, nameless brothers, all of my brothers who have been silenced. Oh, my brother, my brother. I will weep for you whenever the sun rises or falls. Your shadow has been betrayed. The red of the bullet bleeds and covers every breath of all the life you've lived. Oh, my brother, my brother. I will stand here and wail your name. Hold the bullet inside my mouth that cannot stop convulsing with pain. I will learn to swallow the spasms in your screams. I am calling my brothers and my sisters to the ground beside this river where your blood is born, where your blood runs until it is clear, until its red is spent, and it stands up like the wind and speaks into a light we cannot name. Oh, my brother, my brother. I beat my chest, pierce my hands, run back and forth naked in rain, trying to swallow this red of a bullet that knew your name, cracked open your smile, stole your hair. Oh, my brother, I weep for all I do not know about you. I weep with the bullet that is lodged in my throat, whispering its own requiem. The red of the bullet cries out your name. The bullet whispers to me about the flowers that heard the sound. The bullet whispers to me about the sorcery of forgiveness. The bullet whispers to me about black flies stirring the ground beneath your feet. Oh, my brother, who will wash your feet? Save the sand inside your shoes. Oh, my brother, where is your mother, your father, who will help me scrape the dried blood that blocks the doorway of your heart? I want to be the water, the sweet oils that rub into the skin of you. I want to hold your bones steady so your mother can identify your face. Rub the soft earlobes she's kissed 1,000 times. Oh, my brother, how must we hold your lover who wants a redemption for your skin, who searches for your lips in the dark? Oh, my brother, there is so much blood falling from the sky today, suffocating the light, suffocating the babies. I will guard your roadkill blood. If necessary, I will chew the bullet and digest metallic contradiction. I will be the shovel and the grip. I will sing your name into the wind. I will sing your name until the wind lifts it from my tongue and sings your legacy into the 10th degree of sound. I will wail the presence of your history through this throat that is out of rhythm. We be poets, the daughters of your winters and sons of your summers. We be ancient scribes, the architects of your sweat and your tears. My poems will be forever screaming the life of you. I dare the red of the bullet to forget. I dare the killer of you to remember. My words are the acid erasing the crime scene. My words are the softness of all the evidence of ghost hidden beneath your shirt, inside your underwear. Hungry ghost, casting your name into rivers. Oh, my brother. Oh, my brother. Oh, my brother. What are the ancestors singing? Oh, my brother, you don't have to behave in your grave. Oh, my brother, call me, and these lyrics will gather arms, stage your rebellion. The red of the bullet has the poetry of your spirit embedded with indelible ink. Oh, my brother, hear the wail of the red of the bullet. Hear the space between your ribs crumble. Hear the sounds in your chest become a roaring ocean. Hear the butterflies cease flying. Hear this silence that will not be quiet.
That was phenomenal.
It was so great.
Yes, thank you, Jaki Shelton Green. Her album, The River Speaks of Thirst, comes out tomorrow, Juneteenth, which is also her birthday. Happy birthday, Jaki.
Happy birthday, Jaki. I want to talk for a minute and introduce the co-host of Back Channel, which many of you who listen to The State of Things are familiar with. It's our monthly series where we say we connect culture and context. We're taking a look at American culture through the lens of African-American cultural production, movies, film, music, fashion. And I want to hear Mark and Natalie, when I introduce them, talk a little bit about the origins of this, because we had an idea going into this about kind of what we wanted to accomplish here and have this conversation in a way that didn't sound like the other conversations that we'd heard through the media, even in public radio. And it struck me that whenever we talk about race, that, and particularly if you have a white host and a largely white audience, that there's a certain exoticism that creeps in, a kind of accent that gets, you know, where the conversation sounds like you're talking about somebody else. That's always caught my ear, and it's never been quite right. And I wondered if I could do anything about it. Not sure we quite have, but that was the point. Could we have a conversation that is intentional? We're not pretending we're in a colorblind society. We want to be intentional about talking about race in a way that doesn't sound like it's something exotic and not American and not a part of all of our lives. That was roughly the intention. And I was really blessed, we were all blessed to find Mark Anthony Neal and Natalie Bullock Brown as the participants in this who could help make this come to life. Natalie Bullock Brown is a filmmaker and a teaching assistant professor at North Carolina State. Welcome back, Natalie. And Mark Anthony Neal, good to have you. Mark Anthony Neal is a professor and the chair of the Department of African and African American Studies at Duke University. He is also an author and the host of his own webcast, Left to Black. Hello, Mark.
Hey,
Frank. It's been a while since I've seen you, so it's good to see you. Talk a little bit about what, I don't even remember those first conversations we had about what we were trying to accomplish and maybe what you think we're doing. I don't know. I'll start with you, Natalie. What is this? What is Back Channel?
I mean, it's a good question. I really like the way that you spoke of it and talked about, you know, just thinking about how that we don't want to otherize or exoticize, you know, our conversations and make it seem like, you know, we're creating this like voyeuristic experience for listeners. And I guess that's kind of an oxymoron because they're not watching, they're listening. But you know, I think about, I think as we've gone along and you know, and I've grown, and especially in this moment, I'm thinking that maybe even the title, you know, communicates a way of kind of coming in the back way to a conversation that otherwise would not be available to WUNC listeners. So it's a very interesting and sort of tightrope walk that we have to do, because I think both Mark and I are, and I know you are as well, I think we're all interested in providing a really authentic conversation. And I know I'm being as honest as I possibly can. But it's interesting to think about what exactly is Back Channel doing, especially in the backdrop of this moment.
Yeah, and Mark, maybe another way to ask that question too is kind of what are the trials and tribulations along the way? I mean, what have we learned and what do we still have to learn? Where are we falling? Because I think the relevance of this conversation, this part of the conversation is how do we have this conversation? It's something we did think about in putting Back Channel together. So maybe, you know, how it came together for you, how it's been for you, what still needs to be done, what needs to, you know, get right, can help advance that conversation.
I've always loved the title of Back Channel because for me, it reflected some of the earlier days, particularly of Twitter, in which there would be some issue that was taking place and folks would go at things, but folks would take pieces of that and have a back channel conversation that was always more substantive than what was happening in you know, in the mainstream of the conversation. I think the beauty of public radio, the beauty of having an informed listening audience like we have for WUNC, is that we can actually tell and have conversations about those back channels without necessarily always having to provide a larger historical context for it. For the work that Natalie and I do, to actually get to the crux of the issue is a freedom that in most cases on other kinds of platforms, we never get to that crux because we're always framing out the context of what the conversation is. And, you know, we've learned, you know, I think we've learned the beauty of having shows, for instance, that are a little heavy in clip basis so that we have this thing, this artifact, these artifacts that we can respond to in real time. But yet there are all those other times where we organically feel the need to slow down and spend a little bit more time on some things. We always joke about the fact that the hour goes so fast, right? It almost feels like a drive-by until you hear the audience respond to what we do.
Yeah, that's what you should call the show,
right.
Drive-By. Yeah, do that. Yeah.
And I think what's always been important to me, and I'm sure for Natalie, you know, sometimes people give popular culture short shrift. You know, we come from a vantage point that popular culture is always in conversation with things that matter. If you actually spend some time, you know, trying to deconstruct what's happening. And I think we do that very effectively whenever we're on the air.
Well, that was one of the moments where we had to learn, because again, you know, what in all of this, what is the role of the old white man? And you know, seriously, so one of the things you can do is pretend he's not there. It's like, oh, well, it's incidental. You know, it really doesn't matter, white, black, and purple, brown. But it's like, no, wait a minute. This is the guy who's there. What would be the role of this? How do we make that role actually valuable and meaningful rather than just pretend that it's not there? So, but part of that is to model the conversation and to when we make mistakes. For instance, you pointed out, I was saying pop culture experts, Natalie, Bullock, Brown, and Mark, and you asked, you know, could you say popular? Because pop culture really does, you know, diminish the value of this. And would you mind? I said, good point. Let's do that. And so, I mean, I think this Make the Road by Walking, you know, is a good way of understanding kind of what we're up against here, what we're all about. And I wonder if we have questions I'm trying to figure out where to find them all. But, or if this is the time to bring some of those in, because it does feel like it.
Yeah, for sure. We can dive in for one question, and I'll address it to Mark. This is from our audience. Why is Juneteenth not more known and celebrated by all Americans, particularly white Americans?
Well, this is the funny thing about what it means to be Black in America. And Du Bois said this so eloquently, now almost 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, when he talked about that gift of second sight and double consciousness. It means most Black Americans know a great deal about white folks, right? We had to know about white folks in order to be able to move through the world in a certain kind of way. By the same token, most white folks know nothing about Black people. So it's not surprising to me that a large majority of white Americans would have no idea what Juneteenth was, because what would be the context in which they would have to know? We could say the same thing in comparisons to folks who are wondering what Twitter is. I mean, what Kwanzaa is. So it's an interesting dynamic. The interesting thing about this moment is that if the president hadn't been so tone deaf to what was happening in the country at this point in time, and hadn't decided, right, to hold a rally in Tulsa when more Americans found out about, what happened in Tulsa in 1921 because of the Watchmen, and then decide to actually have it on Juneteenth. And again, this is the popular culture piece. More white Americans probably Googled Juneteenth in the last 2 weeks than had ever Googled Juneteenth in the history of Google. So, that it's not surprising to me. That's kind of the reality of what it's mean to be Black in America, that most folks in America have no idea what Black people do and what they are, and how they find peace, in society.
Yeah, it was actually pretty strange to me. I was looking on my Google calendar, and all of a sudden Juneteenth popped up as a holiday on my Google calendar, and it wasn't there before. I swear it wasn't there like last year. And so I was like, oh, June, now it's on Google. Oh, okay. I was like, oh, okay, here we are. But I would like to ask both of you, Mark and Natalie, we sort of shared this question around before, and some of the audience members explained what they were joyful for, what they were, what had lifted their spirits in the last week. So I'd love for y'all to weigh in about, what has been providing the space for joy and freedom in this very fraught, intense moment.
Well, for me, it's been like an unexpected gift to be at home with my family and with my children in particular, because there's a way that we've been able to kind of hang out and spend time without the stress of extracurricular activities and track and dance and all these things. We're running hither and yon and never really being able to be present with each other. And so that has given me so much joy in this moment.
And Natalie, not to interrupt you, but just you have your children's ear. You get to explain to them about the news of the day. They are not leaving the house, and, the other people around them, friends, teachers, or what, get to, try to explain this point in our history. Isn't that great? You get to do that.
Yeah, but okay, but I have teenagers, so they already think they know.
But they don't know. They don't know.
But it is true that there's a way that I can have conversations with them, and that I think this moment, especially, everything that, really starting with Ahmaud Arbery's murder and finding out about that and going all the way forward into the protests and to this very day, there has definitely been time to, at the very least, check in on them and make sure that they're not being traumatized by the ways that they're exposed to all of this media, right? TikTok is like that's their go-to for all things. And so but they actually are exposed to a lot of news on TikTok. So I'm constantly being concerned about, are you good? Are you thinking about this? What are you thinking about the protests? Do you carry fear? Like, are you afraid, EJ, of going out? Because he's driving. I'm afraid. I mean, I'm going to be straight up. I'm terrified anytime he steps out of the door. But we do get to talk about it. So yeah, that's helpful. And then I've been, just to go back to Alicia's question, and I'll end with this, I've been having a virtual happy hour with girlfriends, local girlfriends that I don't get to see. And that started off as just, oh, I'm gonna miss you, I can't see you. And it's turned into something so generative and just sustaining that, it brings me a lot of joy. I look forward to it every week. I'm ready for Friday so I can pull out my margarita and I can get on Zoom and I can share, little tidbits about the week. So, I mean, I'm definitely grabbing my joy where I can.
For me, it's about the same. I have two daughters. I have a teenager who's 17, who's still at home. I have a 21-year-old who's an adult who just graduated from the University of Illinois in Chicago this spring. And, in many ways, at least for us as a family, COVID-19 was a silver lining because it necessitated her having to come home from Chicago in the middle of March and have to be home with us for 2 months before she went back to Chicago. We had the unexpected gift of being together, the four of us as a family, for a period of time that I'd never thought we'd have the experience again. She's going on to graduate school in Chicago in August. And so I had no expectation, particularly after this past Christmas, that we would ever be together for such a long period of time as a family. So it became this unexpected gift. And even as we couldn't travel to Chicago to celebrate her graduation, the other silver lining is that it forced us to do a Zoom-based celebration for her that allowed for us to bring people into the space who never would have been able to have been there to celebrate her graduation, right? So everything from friends and families in New York City and Baltimore, her first club coach from here in Durham, to the boyfriend, who was able to pop into the Zoom with his mother and then get vetted by everybody in the family, in the context of this 90-minute Zoom conversation. The other joy for me in this moment is that I've been able to create a space at home where I can work, which is something that has not been a reality for me probably in about 20 years. And that's unexpected for me to be able to say I can actually stay at home and be present, for my wife and the daughter that's still here and still be productive at the same time.
Much joy in that.
Can I
Well,
also
Frank, sure.
I just wanted to say it's also, Leoneda, you mentioned drive-bys and that we should change the channel, the name of back channel to drive-by.
No.
But I just wanted to say that just one additional joy is being able to drive by and wave and virtually hug my mama, who lives 10 minutes away. And that has been an amazing thing to be able to do, because normally up until last August, she would have been in Chicago and it would have been impossible.
Mm-hmm. And also about the drive-bys, just changing the whole perception of what a drive-by is, because I've had, I've met friends in the parking lot just to wave, and the reason I'm in Florida now, sort of quarantine, is because I got tired of people telling me I couldn't drive by the state of Florida. I was like, you know what? I think I'm about to get in my car and drive to Florida. And believe it or not, when you get to that, you pass Savannah on 95 and you get close to that, welcome to the Sunshine State. All cars have to veer off to see where your license plate is from. I was like, oh my. So they were still doing that just a couple of weeks ago. I was like, wow.
I think the interesting thing about COVID in particular is that it provides a moment of Sabbath where we all collectively have to step back be with one another, and it gives us the gift of one another's presence. And like Natalie, I think your sentiments were echoed by Melody, who wrote in her chat, just hearing my mom's laughter over the phone brings me great joy. Watching my dog run around the yard with apparent glee is joyful to me. Sitting on the porch and feeling a breeze. I think this is the interesting part, because when you slow down, you are like given the gift of presence, and things that you passed over or that you didn't have time for suddenly hold more weight. And I think we're actually experiencing that in this moment. Like I keep having this thought that maybe the groundswell of action is also somehow influenced by this collective experience of COVID-19. And I wonder, like, Mark, Natalie, do you have any thoughts about that? Or, yeah, it seems like we've been dealing with like multiple traumas, but I wonder if like they like open up access points. I don't know. Yeah.
I think there's no question that there seems to be an alignment with the stars, for lack of a better way to describe it. You know, if folks hadn't already felt in a certain kind of way across racial and ethnic lines because of COVID, right? A certain kind of vulnerability, a certain sense of less of citizenship because of what COVID means. They were already in that place when George Floyd gets killed, and we see the video, and you know, if they're not home, stuck in the house, they can't witness, right? The way folks had to bear witness to the killing of George Floyd. When we think about all of those young folks who normally in this period of time would either be in school or pursuing internships or working, you know, that COVID has forced them to not have those kind of access. And so they're in the streets because they can be in the streets. And even just the conversation about Juneteenth, right? Had all of this not been going on and our president reacted the way that he reacted, we would not be having the same kinds of conversations about Juneteenth and Black life that we're having now. So it just seems an interesting alignment in this moment that becomes really this grand rupture of what we've experienced, you know, for more than 200 years.
And, you know, here's a good question that came in. Can you speak about the crossroads, feelings of confusion, fear, possibility, and hope felt during Juneteenth liberation, and what is happening now? So pretty much, you know, that's where we are. You just said a little bit about that, Mark, but what do you think about that?
I think that there is a way that we are experiencing a lot of different things all at once. And I don't think it, you know, especially for African Americans, like I don't think it's unfamiliar to us. I think we've always been in a position where we had to both hold space for joy and for pain and for trauma and for, you know, creative expression and love and all these conflicting emotions that normally, you know, would be really difficult to, I think, hold space for all at the same time. But like our ancestors did that during slavery. They figured out ways to, you know, have joy and to be in the moment, even in the midst of the trauma and terror that they were experiencing and all the catching hell that they experienced. And so I think we are just kind of carrying that tradition really forward, and we need it. I mean, we have to figure out these ways to sit with both what is happening to us, but also the beauty of us, the brilliance of us, the goodness of us, and so forth.
I think one of the things that's really important in this moment, because I think if there's any group that is probably the most bewildered at this moment, it's actually white folks, if we're being honest about it. And one of the things that I've really been grappling with is this push and necessity all of a sudden, right? And I know Mark and Natalie, Alysia, Leoneda, and probably a lot of Black folks listening tonight, that comes with a barrage of questions, requests to speak, requests to explain, requests to write things, requests to to do something, right, to make this moment translatable, right, in some way for folks. And I think one of the things that, getting back to the how we're finding joy in this moment, right, like, and especially in the spirit of Juneteenth, right, is that really listening, right, to ourselves and saying, like, actually, no, right? Actually, like, this moment, right, is for us, right? Like, this moment is not about me explaining to you, right, the last 400 plus years of history, right? Like, this moment is our moment, right, to celebrate, to grieve, to cling to one another, to do whatever we need to do to be present and to take whatever joy we can from this moment. And so that's been one of the things, and I don't know about y'all, but that's been one of the things that I've been grappling with the most, is staying present to what Juneteenth is and like how I am feeling, right, in this moment, and not turning this moment into a moment where more labor is required of me.
Well, I know we have a lot more questions, hopefully, that will be coming in from the audience, but Frank, we
have a few right there.
Where?
Okay,
I know they're coming in.
I'm manning the questions. I'm manning them. I got you.
You got me? Okay.
We've got a question from, I'm not sure who this is from, but we're going with it. I think sort of this gets to, your point, the point that you just made, Danielle, but I'm going to just ask the panelists because we don't speak for all Black people. We only speak for ourselves. So how would Danielle, Leoneda, Mark, Natalie, how would you like white Americans to get the conversations going about making real change happen? So beyond the superficial, like virtue signaling or whatever, how would you like real change to happen? Talk has been happening for years and very little real has come from it. So how do we make real change happen? That's a question from the audience.
And I also see someone, along the same line said, please tell me the most important thing that I can do as a white person to make a difference. I mean, I just think you have to ask yourself some questions. You're gonna have to go inside. You're gonna have to do some introspection and really think about and interrogate what whiteness means and what it has allowed you to do and be. That if there were not this other or these others that don't have the same privilege, don't have the same opportunities, are dealing with police brutality in ways that you don't even have to think about, right? What does that mean? Like, and is that something you want to continue to participate in, like actively? So to me, it starts with the person. Like, you can read all the books, and well, I think there are books that you could read that might help to reveal some of the answers. But I just think people have to get really, really quiet, really, really uncomfortable, and honest with themselves about how they are benefiting from a system that clearly posits them on top of everyone else. And what that, how they're seeing that manifest in Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And my God, the pictures of the folk that were in Jaki Shelton Green's video, I don't even know, there's so many, I don't even know the names of them. Like, that should matter, that so many Black people are being killed by the police that we don't even know all of their names. That's a problem. So how can you change yourself so that you are no longer complicit with a system that does that to Black people?
Well, Frank, what do you think? What do you tell, I guess maybe your white friends? Because I'm sure they ask you.
Not anymore.
They don't want that earful, do they?
Sick of it. But you know, along the lines of what Natalie is saying, I mean, the first thing that you have to do is get very, very quiet and then live with that discomfort, because there's where the truth is, you know, the crack is where the light comes in. So feel that pain, sit with that, understand that perhaps you did work very hard, but if you were Black and worked just as hard, you wouldn't be where you are. And the fact is that in a real world where white supremacy wasn't the order of the day, even working as hard as you did doesn't get you where you are. And that's a painful, because you did work hard. You did work hard, and your mom and dad worked hard. And you don't want to take that away from them, but you have to understand that this is an illusion, and that's hard. Here's where it gets even harder. Because it is true that we have to look at policing now and what public safety really means. It means public health. It doesn't mean more weapons on the streets, right? So we have to look at all these questions around policing, around monuments. I mean, all those externals out there do have to change without any doubt. But none of that changes for any length of time. There's no duration if we don't start changing some of our habits, mostly our consumption habits, because that's what really supports all of this. This stuff stays alive. This stuff doesn't die because of the way we buy. And that is where the real pain, look at, you know, up until now, the greatest trauma, or one of the great traumas in American life in the recent age would have been 9/11. And 3 days after it happens, our president tells us to shop. And he was darn right, because the beast was starving. If you don't spend, that beast dies. And even in this, you notice the stock market is right where it was, hasn't changed, because we're still buying and selling stuff, because the poorest people and most vulnerable people among us are still working to bring us the things that we're still buying, and they're still dying. There's where the pain is. If you don't like what Mark Zuckerberg is not doing about muzzling Donald Trump, get off Facebook. You see, that's the hard part. And so I think it goes one more level. And I think when we get, that's why my friends don't ask me anymore.
Ask you.
I mean, what Frank just said is important, because when we think about some of the corporate shifts that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, right? The fact that we're actually having a real conversation about Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben and the cream of wheat man disappearing. And one of the things that social media has done is that it's created a cancel culture that these corporations are absolutely fearful, right? And if we want to look at the best side of it, they're fearful of being on the wrong side of history. No, they're fearful of the bottom line, that cancel culture will cancel their bottom lines. And so they've reacted in suit in response because of that threat, which is purely an economic threat, right? It's not because they've had any come to Jesus moments about who they are and what their politics are.
We don't see an end to segregation on buses if there's no strike, if there's no sit down at Christmas time. Right? Hey, you know, I tell you what, let's take a break here, because I want to make sure that we see this next video. It's amazing. The River Speaks of Thirst is Jaki Shelton Green's new album that comes out tomorrow on Juneteenth. And I want to play now a video, Litany for the Possessed, that features another North Carolinian. Charlotte Ammons is on this one. And here's the warning. There is, I think, some language here that you might be concerned about. It does contain some profanity. But let's listen to Litany for the Possessed.
A litany for the possessed.
Cultural whoremongers appear on MTV, disguised dapper fresh as third-day bleached linens from a sun not raised on cotton, indigo, or gold. Shaking, singing, ringing, baking, dipping, gliding, stomping, sliding, prancing, bebopping, dancing, praising, hip-hopping, slipping, slurping, belching, fucking. Grave pirates sucking on the bones of spirit prophets. Malcolm, Ray, Miles, Martin, Charlie, Eldridge, Audrey, Denmark, Sojourner, Frederick, County, Nat, Langston, Zora, Louis, Richard, Nell, Mahalia, Billy, Bessie, Marcus, Gwendolyn, Kwame, Toussaint, Mohammed, Kente, tie-dyed, refried, fatigued, bleached, bloodcloth, dreaded, blonde, matted, twisted, reddened, curled, permed, blackened, greened, slinging swords of Quran, Bible, Torah, bringing lies, death, deceit, disgrace. Juneteenth blood bones sipping on holy water that runs backwards. Cultural whoremongers holding hostage prayers, altars, crosses, Allahu Akbar, Ashe, Amen, Namaste, Shalom. Addicts with poems stuck between their teeth. Join the night, pray for a vampirical moon. Bootleg poems sold beside remixed Coltrane, rinsed out Aretha sonnets. Poets posing as undertakers, slip, nip, tuck, drain, splinter, irrigate, protract, stitch, catheterize, graft, skin to word, skin to history, skin to lies, skin to truth. Skin to battlefields in Algiers, Iraq, Vietnam, Korea, Somalia, Johannesburg, Selma, Brooklyn, Compton, Queens, Atlanta, Richmond, Detroit, Afghanistan. Poets posing as seamstresses, so faces, so teeth, so wounds, so laughter, so tears, so regret, so joy, so uprising, so anthems, so constitutions, so treaties, so bombs, so graves, so babies. Brothers on the down low sniffing for game, while sisters play diva, bohemian princess, sable goddess, queen mother, high priestess of counterfeits on a corner. That becomes continent. Sahara, Amazon, Latin, Kurdish. The new immigrants learn to walk, talk, become invisible, eat fire, twist glass. Flat joins round, night forgets that day is his true sister. Rivers forget to open to skies. Freedom is exposed, raw, naked, unadorned, unnamed. Cultural whoremongers, dressed up as words, metaphors, preludes, benedictions, die alone, under skies that rant, retrace, a scorn, theft, murder, lynching of a fallen muse.
I got to run do something. I'm gonna come back.
Well, thank you. A very huge thank you to Jaki Shelton Green, and our North Carolina Poet Laureate, for letting us preview her debut album tonight, The River Speaks of Thirst. That was wonderful, wasn't it?
Amazing.
Incredible. One of the things that I love the most about Jaki, she's become a mentor of mine, a friend over the years, is how, not only like how generative and creative she is, she has some of the best collaborations that I've seen, but also how huge her sense of community is. And so, you know, one of the things that she, and, you know, when we've seen this, you know, she's our North Carolina Poet Laureate, and we've seen her bring folks into the fold. I was at dinner with her before pre-COVID, and she talked to me really at length about all the different corners of North Carolina that she traveled to, and all the different classrooms that she'd been into, and students of hers that, you know, came to her with notebooks filled with poetry, right, in the mountains, and the kind of conversation she was able to have and really get a sense. I mean, she's from North Carolina, but just to get a much broader sense of who all is in this state and how it's shifted over time. And I think, yeah, she really does fully understand the meaning of community and like, what's the word? We've been using the term like mutual aid in a lot of ways, right, over the last few months. And one part of mutual aid, right? And I think this is part and parcel of all these threads of our conversation tonight, has been, right, the kind of realization that when a lot of the systems, right, that kind of make us go, right, the way that we've been going fall away, there are all these ways that things can somehow get done, right? And we can somehow get what we need by our connections to one another. But it requires a kind of opening up and a vulnerability. And that's sort of one of the things that, Jaki has really taught me over the years. So, and that's, I think, tied to, right, like our questions around abolition, right? And in this moment, right? So we're not just talking about what it means to defund the police, sort of the nuts and bolts and logistics, right? It's equally as important, actually, if not more important, to talk about what are the systems that we build, right? If this were a thing that we were able to make happen, right? How do we prevent ourselves from recreating another new Jim Crow, essentially, right? Like, how do we prevent that? And I think, there are a lot of really creative, there are a lot of creative ways that are old, right? Like ways of being in community and being together that are going to be really instrumental for this. So yeah,
Well, we've never actually been, I mean, the nation has never actually been a community. Like, it's never actually, I mean, like as a whole entity grafted together, we've never actually been that. So this conversation around mutual aid, this conversation around what does it mean to rebuild the human bonds in between one another, I think is the question that we're in today. And so one of the questions for the audience is now the right time to push for economic and moral reparations to the Black community to be able to create that, that beloved community that has never been, but might at some point? Is now the time?
If not now, when? I mean, this is, I really believe that there is a portal that has opened up in this moment. It's almost, I used to watch the CW show Flash, and there was like Earth 1 and Earth 2. And I feel like there is a portal into a new Earth that we can decide that we're going to like envision. Like in this moment, we have dismantling to do, but we also have to be creative, right? We do have to know what we want to replace what we tear down with. And I do think that this is the moment. Whether or not we will meet the challenge of this moment, I don't know. But I absolutely feel like, yes, there are so many ways. I mean, there's so much progress that has happened. A lot of little wins that have taken place, right? Systems are still in place, but there are things that are coming down. And I really think that the pandemic in many ways, if we use it, if we see it as a gift, if we take advantage of it, all the ways that it has allowed us to slow down, to really be present, sit with, our thoughts, our creative process. Like there's a way that we can be, I think, more creative in this moment. So how can we use what the pandemic has given us to actually create that Earth 2? So that we can move into a more beloved community, because I think it's possible, but we have to be willing to walk through that portal, that door.
Here's a question, maybe Danielle can talk about this a little bit more. What does it mean to defund the police and the misconceptions of that movement?
Yeah, can y'all see me or hear me?
Yes,
okay,
I do.
Great. My signal has been going in and out. Great. Because y'all are kind of frozen for me right now. But it's a really great question. And I think there are numerous different approaches that people have proposed, and not all of which I agree with. So I think one of the best pieces that I've seen published about what it means to defund the police was in the New York Times, published by, but written by Miriam Kaba, who is an organizer, abolitionist out of, originally from New York, but also worked for years in Chicago. And it really does mean, right, it really is in line with abolition, right? We're not just taking funds away and leaving in place, right, the same kind of system. We are doing away with the system altogether. And the defunding part means a redistribution, right, of resources that we will need to put into the kinds of systems that will keep us safe. And, you know, I think a lot of folks think that that there's a lot of magic, right, to that, magic and mystery to what it would mean to create these alternative systems. And I think one of the things that Miriam Kaba makes clear, and if you followed critical resistance at any time in the last several decades, right, and Black Youth Project 100, what you'll see is that a lot of it is really basic, right? You know, a lot of folks that are sitting up in prisons and jails right now are sitting there because they didn't get what they need, right? Because we're in a system of scarcity, right? That decides who deserves what resources, who deserves housing and food and healthcare, and who doesn't. And one of the big, right, systems of safety, right, in this country, and you can see it from a lot of folks who have everything that they need, right, is just the provision of those sorts of things. So that's sort of, to me, step one, right? And, you know, again, these are things that we've been talking about at Scalawag for a long time, right? We published something back in, I think, 2015, 2016 about where the police come from, right? And really tracking them back to slave patrols in the antebellum era. And they have always been, right, about policing and terrorizing Black people and surveillance. And I think, you know, so there's that sort of step one, right, that defund and redistribution, but then there are also these systems that need to be built up. What would first responders look like, right, in a post-police world? Well, one way that they could look is actually how a group out of Eugene, Oregon, right, like sort of took that, what they did starting back in the 1970s, right, was creating mobile first responders that included mental health social workers, right, physicians or medics, right, counselors that were really versed in like conflict mediation, right, like, and you'd be surprised at all of the stories, if you listen to folks who have been in these fields, of situations that would seem to be situations where everybody would call the police that they've had to handle, right? That they actually have particular training for people, even if they are armed, right? Even if they are deemed dangerous, right? And so there are possibilities there that have been there, right? For a long time that we could start with. But a lot of this work, right, is really down to, I can't remember who I read this from, but I think I read it on Twitter, like getting the cop out of your mind, right? Taking the idea that you are helpless, right, to resolve your conflicts with other people, to manage, right, or build relationships with other people in your community without the mediation, right, of armed forces. So I think that's really, in a nutshell, from what I've learned in doing work in Durham here, and for people who've been writing for Scalawag for a good while now, have sort of gathered about what defund police ultimately means.
And what that means is that's addressing and changing the status quo That's talking about people who have power letting go of some of that, being willing to re-envision how power is distributed. So it basically means that those who have the privilege have to be willing to give it up. And are people willing to do that in order to fulfill what Danielle is talking about? All of these like really logical, reasonable, basic ideas about providing for the human welfare, but we have to agree that everyone is human, right? We have to agree on that before we're able to do that. And there are just so many things that are embedded in our culture, so many myths about who Black people are, who Indigenous people are, who other people of color are, that we have to get out of our minds. In addition to the cop, we've got to get these myths out of our heads. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do it.
When we think about the kinds of resources that are used to support policing in various communities, and let's think about it in a K through 12 context, the number of schools just here in Durham that don't have regular school nurses, that don't have regular social workers, that don't have mental health professionals, but yet every one of those schools have resource officers that are coming from local law enforcement. We'd rather police our children than to deal with them in terms of their health, their needs on a daily basis, right? And perhaps some of the reasons why you think you need to have resource officers in those schools would actually be dealt with more effectively if you actually had human resources in those schools to help children deal with what they need to deal with.
So speaking of resources, you know, I think a lot of people, we only have about 7 minutes left in the conversation, and I really want us to be able to leave the audience with some of the resources that, you know, they can pick up, they can dig into, that they can do some of this hard work of sitting with themselves or of sitting with other people whom they love, who, you know, are tripping. But so if one person if everyone could go around and make a recommendation about one or two resources that they think have been really helpful in this conversation, I can definitely start. I have many resources, but I'm gonna make a shameless plug for Scalawag, as I am wont to do. So we've got, it was published today. It's a resource guide. It's a roundup for Juneteenth, and it's talking about, you know, we've always been abolitionists. And so I would just, you know, I think someone's going to drop it in the chat somehow, somewhere. But I would just like to just read a few things off on this, from this resource guide. It's on our website. Black remembrance is an act of liberation. Okay. Black movement is an act of liberation. Black imagination is an act of liberation. Black verse is an act of liberation, right? Black food is an act of liberation, right? So these are all of the ways that we are collectively practicing and stewarding and shepherding one another in terms of how to get free. So check that out. It's got a ton of our resources, but that's just one place where you can go and also like feel the solutions kind of percolating and the resistance kind of percolating.
I'm going to double down on that recommendation. I read a lot of left-leaning organs. There's a lot of Nation and Jaki in these Times magazine in my timeline, but none of those entities cover race, and particularly race in the South with the kind of sophistication and passion that Scalawag does. So click on it as often as possible. Get yourself a subscription. Independent Black media is so significant, as it always has been. We got through the civil rights movement because of independent Black media. And while everybody would love to get their name up in the New York Times and the Washington Post and all these other places that help make Negroes famous, it's also important to support independent Black media.
Right. I guess one book that I'm reading now, and a disclaimer, I know these two pretty well, Kirsten Mullen and Sandy Darity. And, you have yours, From Here to Equality, yes. You want to talk about reparations and you want to know, why it's taken so long and why it's needed now. That's the book to read. But I was glad that you also mentioned food, because the book that I had to get, and it's not new, but High on the Hog, A Culinary Journey from Africa to America by Jessica B. Harris. I mean, Black food, my heart. And you want to know why we eat what we eat, why we eat it, why we cook it, why we live it, and why on Juneteenth you have your watermelon and red soda water. I mean,
even when it might kill us.
Even when it might kill us, and your barbecue. I mean, you know, it's a reason for that, and it doesn't have to kill us anymore. That's why I like all the great culinary artists out there. Next, who has a book? Anybody else have anything to recommend?
I would say I'm trying to think of things that just really blew my mind and helped me to grow and evolve. I think that there's a way that, since film is my background, I'll recommend some films. So I think there's a way that Shala Lynch's Free Angela and All Political Prisoners, or Stanley Nelson's The Black Panther Party, Vanguard of the Revolution, do real work in humanizing and taking away the boogeyman status of Black people, and show that these figures, Angela Davis and the Black Panthers, particularly, and certainly Huey Newton, like the central figures of the Black Panther Party, were doing liberation work. They were not, you know, they weren't, it was their radicalism, the fact that they spoke truth to power and were not afraid to do it in the era of Nixon and so forth, that made them, I guess, scary. But they are the types of people that certainly Black people need to lift up and just embrace. And I think there's a way that white people, when you learn their stories, you realize, I hope, that, you know, these were people who really cared about their people. These were people who loved Black people and were trying to make a difference, and were basically leaning into their constitutional rights. But it's always when Black folks get a gun that all of a sudden it's a problem, right? So those films in particular, I would recommend highly.
Yeah, and I have too many things that I could recommend, but I too am going to do a shameless plug for Scalawag. As one thing, we actually are having a virtual screening of a documentary, speaking of documentaries, Natalie, of a documentary called Mossville, When Great Trees Fall, about a historic Black town in Louisiana, and its confrontation with environmental racism. And there are so many themes about Black land and liberation and food, environmental stewardship, as well as, right, the ongoing, right, like battle, right, to protect Black life, Black breathing, right, against toxic industry. So that's next Thursday. It's June 25th at 6:30 p.m. Go on our website, check it out, sign up. I highly recommend reading Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. There's a lot of sci-fi out there and a lot of dystopian fiction, but I would not defy people. I'm sure there's plenty of other, particularly Black sci-fi, that really speaks to this moment. But not only does it really portray the kind of dystopic situation that we're finding ourselves in, but it also talks very clearly about, or its themes really clearly about what we need to do to shift our relationship to one another and to the planet in a way that, well, is integral to our survival. So I really recommend that. And then if you want some nuts and bolts, right? If you're like, I want to know the policy, right? Like, I want to understand what does it mean to like defund the police and all those sorts of things, please. And you know, you're here in especially for folks here in North Carolina, another shameless plug, Durham Beyond Policing is a coalition in Durham that's been doing this work for about 4 years now. We have a website, durhambeyondpolicing.org. We had a proposal to defund the police or to not let them have a budget increase last year that we won. It had, in that proposal, had a whole lot of outlines of best practices and other systems of public safety that already exist in other places. So yeah, just a shameless plug for that, along with a lot of the national organizations, Movement for Black Lives, that have been thinking about this for a long time.
Frank, what about you?
Well, definitely Scalawag, so I'm on board with that, without a doubt. Also, Parable of the Sower, but I have a couple of others, so I'm not without anything. You're right about every bit of that, and I think it's well worth reading. The other one would be John Lewis's memoir, Walking with the Wind, which I think is just, it's a great story. It's an amazing story, and it does encapsulate some of the history of the more recent civil rights movement. And another one, which I think is can offer you some hope. It's a strange book called The Mushroom at the End of the World, and it's I can't actually remember the author's name. She is a professor at UC Santa Cruz, but what she does is she writes about the marketing, the supply chain for this particular mushroom, right? That's prized in Japan, and the thing is, you can't, it's way outside of capitalism's reach. You can't standardize it. You can't even grow it. You can't cultivate it. And it's worth a lot of money. And it's just, and she writes about, and so what subversively this book, first of all, it talks about this mushroom, which is crazy. It also talks about the affection they have for this mushroom in Japan, which is even crazier. But then the kind of confederacy of people who have come together to find these things, the way that they auction them, the way they get them distributed, all outside capitalist supply chains. And then this idea of this fungus that works with this communication network to keep trees alive and the whole thing is a kind of an act of poetry, but it's a nonfiction book. And it does give you a sense of what a post-capitalist world could look like with these federations of people who are working for each other and themselves in very small units, who get it done because it's necessary. It's a fascinating read, and it also offers some hope without a kind of dystopian, without that middle part, which the middle part is the part I never like, which is all the people who have to suffer to get there. But Mushroom at the End of the World.
Well, Frank, it's almost time for us to wrap this all up right now, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Time to go. Thanks so much. Well, let's see, what do I have to say? I know there are things I'm supposed to say at the end. North Carolina Public Radio is a broadcast service.
Well, we'd like to say that definitely on SOT tomorrow.
With Nina Freelon, we should say
yes.
that. And we're going to
and Jaki Shelton Green tomorrow at noon.
Yeah.
On the State of Things.
Which will tomorrow's actually her birthday, right?
I know.
We'll have her on, and that's on the State of Things. So shameless promotion. We'll do that too for the show. And thank all of you and each of you for participating in this. I think it's been, as fruitful as any kind of words can be in this time. So thanks for giving us your time and attention and your deep thoughts. And thank you for also joining us online.
Yes.
I know, this was great. Thank you,
Thank
Alysia,
you.
Danielle. Thanks, Scalawag.
And
Thanks, Mark Anthony, Neal, Natalie.
All of the attendees, in an email after this call, you'll get a link with all of the resources. So the things that we mentioned, if you didn't take notes, you will get resources. Fret not. Thank y'all so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.